lost relative.
All right, Tam, do
Are you going to let everyone in?
you want to, or do you want me to?
I can just click. Yep.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're just going to wait just 1 minute to see if anyone else is joining us before we get started. We just want to ask if everyone can please turn their mics on mute so not to interrupt the procession. But if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll definitely answer them later. Thank you. Cool. So we're just about to get started. I just want to say thanks again for you guys joining us today, and welcome to the virtual launch celebration for Lynne Golodner's 11th book and first collection of personal essays, Forest Walk on a Friday. Today we'll hear from Lynne a little bit about how this book came to be and what you'll find in its pages, and she'll also be in conversation with some pretty amazing writers. Joining us today are Danny Hankner, who lives in Davenport, Iowa. He works as a master electrician for his own company, rides and builds mountain bike trails, and is an editor-in-chief of Story Unlikely, an award-winning literature magazine. Lynne's favorite essay, and the one that opens Forest Walk, The Roads We Travel, was first published in Story Unlikely. Secondly, we've got Liebler, is a longtime professor, literary activist, and poet with 15 books to his name. He's traveled the world for State Department, using the spoken and written word to bring people together in peace. Emal has been a friend and mentor to Lynne for decades. Kim Kozlowski, sorry about that, is a Detroit news journalist and an incredible essay writer who often writes about discovering long-lost relatives. She travels the world very adventurously and is part of the Michigan writing group that Lynne has been part of for a decade or longer. Jessica Finn chronicles life's deepest complexities in Breathtaking, a memoir of families, dreams, and broken genes. She hosts the I Don't Know How You Do It podcast, featuring real, raw, and rare conversation with people whose lives seem unimaginable. She writes the Gracing Grief column for Psychology Today, and her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Newsweek, and Boston Globe, HuffPost, and other leading publications. At the end of the Zoom, I'll also be raffling off a copy of Lynne's new book to a lucky winner. And Lynne's also going to be doing a giveaway of ML's book, I Want to Be Once, a copy of Jessica's memoir, and a print copy of Story Unlikely. To win, please remain on the call until the very end. And then don't just leave, because we'd also like your details, your email and phone number of the winners so we can chat to you guys after. I'm just going to be reading a short synopsis of Forest Walk on a Friday. Since she was 6 years old, Lynne Golodner has turned to writing to make sense of the world, figuring out her feelings and processing experiences. In this riveting, heart-spilling collection of personal essays, Lynne takes the reader on a journey with her through travel, religious exploration, parenting, relationships, and intimate encounters with the natural world. Forest Walk on a Friday contains 28 essays, 20 of which have been previously published in literature journals and magazines, articulating the aches of lost love, embarking on a soul journey to find happiness alone on a mountaintop, making peace with the loss of a father, and examining what work is. The Detroit-based author of award-winning novels, poetry collections, and nonfiction books, Lynne opens her heart to readers in a daring and brave way, inviting them to contemplate how humans find happiness and what makes life worth living. As with all of her books, Lynne shares the beauty of her Jewish identity and the ancestry she inherited through food, visits with beloved relatives, and quiet walks in the cemetery to visit those she's lost. She details her 2 marriages, showcasing the courage it took to leave one that didn't work and sharing the gratitude she found in discovering new love at midlife. As a parent of 4 children, Lynne is candid about the joys and challenges of being an attentive parent and the emotions that come with letting go of her grown children as they prepare to leave home. And Lynne writes about connecting with the earth, finding herself in the soil and on the river, and discovering the happiness of coming home to oneself. Readers will salivate over descriptions of oysters fresh from the ocean, just picked strawberries staining mouths with their sweetness, blueberries bursting off the bush, and the familiarity of a grandma's chicken soup, fragrant and flavorful. Forest Walk on a Friday is an exquisite wander through one woman's life, offering universal lessons about how to be happy with what you have, how to cherish the identity you inherit, and how to be open to possibilities as one walks through life. Forest Walk on a Friday also launched on Tuesday and is now available anywhere you can buy books, audio, ebooks, and paperback formats. I'm now going to hand this over to Lynne. Here's Lynne.
Well, thanks, Tams, and hi, everybody. Hearing that whole thing was like a little overwhelming to hear about your own career. So it's humbling, and I'm really, really grateful that you're all here to celebrate the launch of this book, which is very different from my last two, which is so interesting because I wrote all of these essays individually and submitted them for publication one by one, but putting them all together in one collection was a really interesting experience. I had to look at what themes existed in my writing, and since this is nonfiction, that means the themes that exist in my life. And that meant revisiting different versions of myself, which wasn't always easy or comfortable because I'm no longer those versions of me. And yet, because I captured them in time and space, they still exist in my shadow. And then, of course, narrating the audiobook, wow, I was once again confronted with my own vulnerability, mistakes, memories, good times and bad. I had to not dissolve into tears at some of these essays that I have written and reread many times. So hopefully you don't hear that on the audio version. But I write about it all because first, I write to make sense of my experiences and figure out, what I believe, what I think about things. And then secondly, I figure if I can learn something from the moments of my life, then I can share that wisdom with others and start an exchange that brings heightened awareness along with connection. So I'm really happy to be here with some very good friends who are also incredible writers. And I want to put questions before each of them, Jessica, ML, Kim, and Danny. And I thought we'd make it a little conversation and then open it up to general Q&A before we start giving away free books. So first and foremost, easy question, and you can jump in at any order, but I'm wondering, why do you write about your life? Why not just make everything up and stick with fiction? What is it about nonfiction that compels you to be brutally honest on the page? Who wants to go first?
I'll go.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I love the why not just stick with fiction, as though fiction is so easy. So I have always written nonfiction. I love reading fiction, and also feel like it's almost like asking somebody who is like a concert pianist, why not just be a rap singer? Like that, to me, they have nothing in common. In that, I do not believe I have the imagination to write fiction. So why not just stick with fiction is a funny way to think about it, because to me, that would be something like I could never imagine having the skill set to do.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's my answer. And nonfiction, for me, that's just comes so naturally. It's like, okay, this is happening now. Let's like articulate it. Let's gain some control over the narrative by putting pen to paper, so to speak. Fingers to keyboard.
Yes, and I want to hear from the others too, but I first want to ask one follow-up question, Jesse, which is, you have all these experiences, they happen, you learn from them, but you don't have to write about them. Like, why put pen to page to talk about it, to sort of process, and then share it with the world? So I guess I'm wondering for you what that is.
Yeah, and I'm a big believer in creativity as a way to A, make life more interesting, and B, to get through difficult things. And for me, my creative outlet is writing. I mean, for, my husband, he's building a canoe in the garage. Something else that I could just aspire to and think about, but never actually do. So for me, the process of writing does allow me to, again, gain some control of the narrative. It allows me to make fabulous connections with people because we start talking about the things that are real, the things that often we don't talk about. For me, it's easier to write about. And so those are a few of the reasons.
Awesome. So ML, Kim, or Danny, you guys want to tackle that question? Danny,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'll be happy to go next. So I guess for me, kind of similar things with what Jessica said, that like fiction is its own thing. And I write fiction, but I write more memoir than I write fiction. And it's a totally different process when I sit down for one versus the other. So when I'm writing memoir or narrative nonfiction, however you want to call it, it's like an exploration where
Mhm.
I'll take like an emotion. And Lynn, I think you and I have even talked about this, because I know you write about this sometimes in your newsletter, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one. Like there's other people have this crazy weird brain that I have as
Yep.
well. And so
Yep.
it's like you have these emotions and attached to like a time or a place or a thing, and you're like, oh, there's something there. I want to unwrap it. And so you start, putting down ideas and then molding them together and seeing what takes shape. And it's like through that process, not always is there something that a narrative that comes out, but usually there is, and there's something good. And when you go through that, you're learning more about how you think and how you feel about
Sure.
that thing. But at the
Yeah.
end of it, you get to share that with somebody else. It's like, here's this, like, it's like going into a wood shop and building a project, but
Yeah.
then you get this, like, the process is fun and exciting itself, but
Yeah.
then you also get this beautiful thing that you can show someone else, and it has a purpose and a function,
Yeah.
and other people can enjoy it as well. The thing that I love about memoir over fiction is that there's something really powerful and potent to a real story when you put because look, fiction is great and we all love any story that's fantastic, but when there's that added element of like, this really happened to somebody, like this, whether it was heartbreaking or hilarious, there's just something magical about that you cannot copy. You can't copy that in fiction. And I don't know what it is, I don't know why it is, but I'm drawn to that. And I know, like, for myself, again, writing, I've written both, I read both, but the most powerful responses from people are by far the memoirs that I've written. And again, it's comedy, it's tragedy, whatever. Our lives are both,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
that's, I love that. I love that element. And I love that element about your writing, Lynn, because
Oh,
you're so bold and you're so courageous with the things and I'm not just saying that, I'm not sucking up. I really genuinely mean that. So many people are afraid to put their heart out on the line. And I think writers, especially, that's the real tragedy, is
yeah.
because writers, like, we're supposed to dig deep inside of us and bring that out. And I like, the writers that I know are the most, like, fearful people of showing and exposing who they really are. So when you come across people like you and what your writing does, it's like, this is a breath of fresh air. This is something that should be read because it's a cut above what I see out there.
Thank you. Thank you. And just
Absolutely.
so you know, those people on this call, when Danny accepted my essay, The Roads We Travel, which is the opening essay in the book, it was the best acceptance I've ever had. And I think it's one of my best essays ever. And it took like 32 submissions before I hit Story Unlikely. And he responded within like 18 hours. And it made me cry. Your response made me cry. And and we
Yeah.
become friends. And it's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
so there is that relationship between the
Yeah.
writer and the reader, and I think that's cool.
Yeah. No, I love that story. And I know you've mentioned it before. And I've just, when I first heard that, I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes my day, to hear that, you had that reaction, because not everybody does that. Not everybody. And like, as an editor, and I'm reading, thousands of submissions a year, and most, like, rejections we don't usually respond to. It's just, here, it's automatic, blah, blah. But on
Yeah,
the acceptances, like anybody who we accept, like, you have done a tremendous work on this piece of writing, and you deserve a little more than, hey, great job, we'll accept it. Like, there's a reason why we're accepting it, is because it's fantastic. And so I want to try, as the guy accepting it, like, I should be able to articulate a little bit why
yeah,
it's so great. So
So
It's
I just
great to
want to
hear.
do a little plug because is today the deadline or tomorrow the deadline to submit to your conference?
Tomorrow, yes, yeah,
Oh, okay.
tomorrow is the last day to submit. So, just for anybody who's listening, and if you're a writer, I run a magazine. It's called Story Unlikely, and every year we do an annual contest. It's free to enter, and our prize package is $3,000. That's be split up between the top 3 stories. So you can go to our website right now. The deadline is end of tomorrow, Central Standard Time. So you have nothing to lose. Like, just submit. The worst case scenario, you're not, nothing happens, but maybe you win a bunch of money, maybe get published. Who knows?
Awesome. ML or Kim, do you guys want to weigh in on this question? Yeah, Kim?
I'll
Oh,
just mention, sorry,
go ahead. ML, go ahead.
I'll just mention that to respond to that question and even listening to what Jessica said, being a poet, and I just finished my memoir that the University of Wisconsin is going to publish. But what I tried to do in each of the chapters is give it a, what we'll call it creative nonfiction, or bring some poetry to it, because that's what my inner core is. It's not telling stories about myself.
Mhm.
So that's the way I approached everything, kind of like you do in your essays, like in a short story, and this, um, that the very first sentence is key.
Oh, yeah.
And you nailed that in your essays,
Mhm.
which is great. And I tried to do that in each of my chapters, put a creative spin on it, and also have it engaging as the first line in a story or a novel. Would be mostly in stories, though, because everything is unified around one theme. Um, and the other part of that point is, yeah, I wanted to be as honest. I thought, you know what, if you're going to do this, you gotta tell the truth
Mhm.
about all the situation. Now, many of the situations, as you know me, in the book are humorous,
Yes.
but there are some, heartbreaking points too in it, because and so. I wanted to kind of keep things in that way, but be honest about it. However, just now saying that, let me say this. Let me see who's on this call here. In I was in one of the chapters is about my experiences working with music and poetry and all that. The Magic Poetry sort of band chapter in it, which by the way is called Captain Beefheart. But and you have to buy the book to understand that, but which isn't coming until later this year. But in doing that, I, as Lynn knows, I've had a magic poetry band or a band since the 80s. I'm not a musician. It's a kind of a different thing that I do with poetry and music. I hate to say it this way, but you have to see it to kind of understand it or listen to it, because it's not me, trying to sing a song, but sometimes I do. Um, but anyway, in that chapter, there's a number of different magic poetry bands since 1985. And one of my favorite ones finally just got back together after 25 years. And I didn't have anything bad to say about the other band, but there was an incident that came up. And I thought, during those days, 25 years ago, and I thought, I went back and I did buff that a little bit, because when I wrote it, I hadn't seen those folks in that many years. Maybe you can relate to that too. Maybe that's a question for you.
Yeah.
So I didn't change anything. I just maybe, I don't know, took names out or something, some way to soften, because the band is so good and I love these people dearly, and I always did. This group was my favorite of all of them.
Well, we're going to get to a question related to that in a minute about writing about hard things. So if you want, we can move on to
Okay,
Kim's
so that's
answer.
all
Yeah.
that's good. That's what I'd say for
Awesome.
my 2 cents.
Yeah. Kim, do you want to weigh in before I ask you the next question?
Absolutely. I would say that the reason why I write memoir is because everyone has a story. And I have spent my career as a journalist telling other people's stories. Um, every story I've written always has to have someone illuminating whatever issue that we are writing about. And at some point, I realized that I wanted to tell my own stories because I've spent so much time and energy and passion writing other stories. I wanted to write my own. And I also read once in a book, so I'm co-opting someone else's ideas, that everyone here should consider writing memoir, because at some point we're all going to die and our lives will be forgotten if some of our experiences are not put on paper. I mean, what I would do to read something that my mother had written or my father or someone else I loved. And even if it's just a few essays, I'm saying that to all of you here because we all have a story to tell.
Yeah. Oh, you're gonna make me cry. That's really great. So in this book, in Forest Walk, I wrote about some truly uncomfortable topics. My failed first marriage, for one, and leaving orthodoxy for another. But I think the essay in here that gave me the hardest time was called Only Living Bodies Bleed, which is about the practice of family purity that Orthodox Jewish couples observe. And it's a very vivid and tell-all essay. I'm sure you're all going to go buy the book right now so you can see what I said. But it took me 5 years to write that essay to the point of being publishable because it was uncomfortable. And then when I finally got to that point, it was published in an international magazine, which was great. And I was really proud of it, but also a little bit embarrassed, like, why did I write about this? So I'm wondering you guys on the panel, are there topics that have been hard for you to write about? Have you confronted them anyway? And if so, are you glad you did? And so maybe Kim, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. And I guess before we get away from that essay, I mean, Lynn, when I think of you, that is a story that resonates in my mind. I will never, ever forget that essay. I feel like it took me to a place that I didn't know about. And I also thought it was brave and courageous. And it was just a memory that will always stick in my memory about your writing.
Thank you.
And yeah,
And
yeah.
also, thank you to you. I know, and Lisa and Karen are on this call who are in our writing group, and to all of the people in our writing group, because I think I brought like multiple versions of that essay over those years to you guys to be like, is it ready? Is it ready? And like it never was until, 5 years down the road. So thank you for the role you played in getting it there too.
Yeah, yeah. As for writing about difficult topics, yeah, I do attempt to write about them because, as life is messy and complicated and painful. In addition to, all the joys that we experience, I do think that, including in your writings, the full breadth of being human is really important, because otherwise you're only kind of putting on a certain image out there of yourself to yourself as you're writing. So yes, I do think it's really important to be writing about things that are difficult and challenging and embarrassing, as you would say, just because it's life. And I do think that those kind of stories resonate with others. And I do think that's also a purpose of writing about anything. I mean, that's what I love so much about your book, Lynn, is I felt like the themes were so universal and anyone could really identify with
Oh, thank
what
you.
you wrote.
Thank you. Jessica, do you want to go next? Because I know you write about difficult things too.
Yeah. Who wants to write about somebody who's got it easy, right? I mean, like if it's somebody's like, my life is perfect, and it's like, okay, that's boring. So that's number one. Number two, my life has been really, really difficult. It's also been glorious in many ways, as you're saying, you know, all of our lives are both of those things. For me, writing about so much loss is a way to stay really close to the people I've lost as I surface those stories. So that's one way that it really helps me. I also think that it allows us to control the narrative, to figure out how we feel about something when we go through the process of writing it. You did ask, is there anything that's been particularly difficult for you to write about? And I'll share, for people on the call, I write about a lot of loss. I've lost a lot of people. And so one might think that would be my answer, right? Writing about the death of my child, my siblings, my parents. But I will say the thing that I think gets me the most stuck is writing about conflict with my husband,
Mm.
of which there's not much. I mean, we have a healthy, good relationship, whatever, but any healthy, good relationship does have conflict. But that is the feedback that I got most
Huh.
from every reader of my book before it was published was, you're making him out to be a little too perfect. You're making him out to be, and I'm like, but he's so great, whatever. And they're like, this is not a believable character. And so I had to really start to make him, like I told him, I was like, I got to make you more of a cad so you'll be believable, right? So coming up with some stories that did show a little bit more texture and that did make him a more believable character. But for me, that was something with all the really intense, difficult stuff I was surfacing, that was probably the hardest.
That's so funny. I did come away from reading Breathtaking thinking he was this amazing guy. Like,
And
wow.
this was the version where I made him a cad. So you can imagine what he was like before.
I'm like, he's a saint. I love this. This is great. And actually, my husband's on the call, and he'll be happy to know I never really write about our conflict. It would probably make for some great writing, but I feel like why? I think I don't know why. I don't know if anybody wants to answer that, but like, I write about my ex-husband, which is probably not fair to him, but that's so far in the past, and I don't have attachment to that anymore. So it's like I can look at it with distance, which I think sometimes makes it easier to write it. But I will say, like, the year after my dad died, every essay I wrote ended up being about him, and they're all in this book. Like I wrote about swimming, it ended up being about my dad. Like it was just, and I think that's how I process the grief, by writing. And I will say that even now, when I read them, it makes me cry. When I did the narration for the audiobook and I read those essays about my dad, there's one in particular, I was like, okay, you can't cry. You can't cry. Your voice has to be like steady on because it still evokes that in me. And I think when it's still that close to the surface, maybe it's easier to write about. I don't know. I don't know. So yeah, but your husband came off in a really good light. He really did. Yes. Danny or ML, do you guys want to weigh in on the difficult
Yeah,
topics? Yeah.
I'll be happy to. Well,
Yeah.
first of all, Jessica, if you ever want to write about me, if you're, if you make people look so good, you can write about me all day long because I need a little PR.
Awesome.
Uh,
Maybe I'll take you up on that.
but yeah, I think, I think our society is dying for authenticity, and we've been living in this Facebook, here's this image, here's this projection of myself, and no one wants to project something bad. So we're just sort of swimming in this inch deep, shallow narrative of everyone's lives. So when you contrast that with saying, okay, well, there are things that are messy, there are things that are hard, there are things that are difficult, and you show that and you expose that to people, that really connects with them on a much deeper level. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to talk about our failures. It's hard to talk about the things like when we lose people. For me, I've seen, I lost my dad, years ago. I've lost my son, and writing about those things is incredibly, it's, I mean, hard in a way. It's hard, but in a way, it's good because you're working through those things and processing them as well.
Mhm.
And then if you get to the point, and I think anybody, even whether they're writers or not, should write about those tough things because it's such a good, it's like there's something spiritually nourishing about that helps you to process. I don't understand it all, but it's a good thing. But if you get to the point where you write a story about, say, loss or a hard thing, and it's ready to go out there, again, those are the things where I've seen the most connection from other people because you don't know what they're going through. We don't know, like most people aren't just coming up to you and spilling their guts out
Yeah.
over the airwaves. And they're going to connect with that because their lives are hard too. And so I think, and this kind of segues back to your previous question, when, if we're writing fiction, which is awesome and we love it, but you're sort of conjuring up a thing and they're falling in love with the thing. But
Mhm.
when you write about your own life and the hard stuff and the difficulties, they're falling in love with you. And
Yeah.
I don't mean that in like a boy meets girl sort of way. I mean that in like they're resonating with who you, the three-dimensional, like they're seeing the real you, and
Yeah.
they're saying, that's they see themselves in that, and that there's a connection that's formed. And I know you talk about this all the time about finding meaning and purpose and making these connections. That's how you do it. That's how
Yeah.
you do it.
Yeah, you know me pretty well, Danny. I will say that, I thought about when I decided to do this book, I thought about, well, I know what it is to succeed as an author, and you want to be in the same genre, putting out a lot of work so that readers who read that genre get, start to follow you and become super fans. And so, like, having two novels out in, a year apart, and then putting out a book of nonfiction essays, I sort of questioned, like, should I do it? Should I not? But every time I speak about my novels, people say, A, is this about you? It's fiction. It's not. We write from what we know, but whatever. But also, when I love a novelist, I want to find out about them as a person. And so I thought maybe this book actually is compatible with the fiction that I'm writing because, people like my novels, they might want to learn more about me, and the writing style is the same, and then endear to the brand a little bit more. So that's why I decided it's a good thing to do, and it's not going to like upset the flow of building an author career or whatever. Amel, did you want to weigh in on this question before we move on for one more?
Yeah, I don't want to, I don't need to say a whole lot. I forgot what your initial question was, and I had an answer to it, but
Are there topics that have been hard for you to write about?
yeah, well, there's that. There's some of that in the book. My story is, you know, it it's there's basically there's some real sadness, and I did write about it, and in a couple of chapters there's loss of sorts. And yeah, it affected me emotionally because now I've been reading through the draft, I mean, making my final corrections and stuff, and revisiting this stuff, which actually is a question I might have for you. I thought we were asking you questions, um, which is one thing I've been thinking about with my book is, and I would think ask you of it. Although yours is really revealing. I know a lot of this. I know a lot of your history, and it's really interesting how you wrote about those things so openly and honestly. Uh, and then I'm thinking, gee, I don't know if I did that. If I was that, brutally honest about various things, loss in particular. But
Uh-huh.
I try to be, and I think I am.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, anyway,
Okay.
let's go on.
Awesome. I have one more question for you guys, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for some questions, and then we'll do our giveaway. So I was asked recently by a journalist what I want people to take away from reading this book. And I said, I'd love it if a reader sees my human frailties in these stories, and by sharing them openly and honestly, I help them feel okay about their own imperfections. Um, that if I can make mistakes and recover from it and still like myself, that maybe they can too. So I want to ask the four of you, what do you hope is the impact when you write and share your personal stories?
I'm just going to say that my stories, and you've heard some before too, but people have been telling me I had no intentions of. I mean, I'm a working class person. I don't have any illusions that people care anything about what I'm doing or what I've done. But in the course of all these years with all these different writers and poets and stuff, many times they would say, "Oh, you got to write that down. You got to write that. You got to tell that story." And so that's sort of what I attempted to do in it. And I based the whole book on music because I've been strongly connected to that since Grandma turned me on to Elvis at the age of 4. It's been rock and roll ever since. But um, so it's a different kind of thing. It's kind of like an album with different tracks on it with these people. I just use them as springboards to then tell the stories that people have been saying. You got to tell that story. So I use the music as a springboard and then go into the story.
Awesome. What about the rest of you? What do you hope people take away from your writing? Yeah, Danny.
Yeah, I think it depends on each individual story because everyone has a different, maybe purpose or theme. But I think for each, like generically, it's like you're trying to convey, say, an emotion, and hopefully you can reach into the soft part of their soul and pull that out of them. So if you're writing humor,
Mhm.
I hope I make them laugh, right? If
Yeah.
I'm writing something that's deep and meaningful, maybe I hope I make them cry. Or
Uh-huh.
if it's something that I just want them to think about, or even to, I think speculative fiction is great for this, even though it's not memoir, is to access the imaginative, almost like the childlike wonder in us, and
Yeah.
get those gears turning again. And I think, kind of going back to what you said about you doing different books in a genre and then skipping over to this.
Uh-huh.
As you know, like I'm nuke the genres. I don't care. I just want good stories. And I
Yeah.
think every genre like has things that they do really well.
Mhm.
And I wish like the whole writer community, I wish we could kind of sort of fuzzy these things a little bit more and learn like you can learn and pull different things from each of these and blend them together and just do
Yeah.
whatever you want.
Yeah.
But whatever it is, just tell a really good story and pull that emotion out, whatever it is you're trying to do. So that's whenever I go to whatever the story is, pull an emotion, whatever that may be. Yeah.
Connect with that reader. Love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Kim or Jesse?
I would say that I would hope that some of the stories that I write about my personal life would be to maybe help people maybe think about things a little bit differently, or maybe perhaps inspire them. Like a good example would be I wrote an essay about being with my mother when she died, and I was with her at that moment. And maybe people might think differently about, being with someone when they do cross over from this life to the next. But I do think that what I hope the most from writing about your personal life would be to share vulnerabilities about myself in hopes of encouraging others to be vulnerable, because I think people are not very comfortable always being vulnerable and open and sharing who they really are. Um, we did talk about the whole social media movement, and how there's a certain face people put out there, but even before that, I do think that even in social circles that people aren't as vulnerable as maybe they could be, and I just hope that people would maybe think about becoming more vulnerable. And I do think that's why people read memoirs, because, they get so intimate with someone else's life. So I would say vulnerability
Okay.
primarily.
Awesome. Jessica.
Well, I feel like a little bit of what Danny said and a little bit of what Kim said. I used to, my career was in overseeing creatives, and I used to say, listen, if you didn't make somebody laugh or cry, you didn't succeed, right? It's got to be one or the other. But I really think that through my book, the feedback I've gotten is that it's a lot of both. And beyond just laughing or crying, or laughing and crying, I do hope that I, as Kim said, help people see things perhaps in a different way, about how we can live with really the most tragic circumstances and create a life of joy and meaning. And that's something that I didn't understand before I actually went through it. And I hope people take that away. And I hope people take away that we are capable of so much more than we think. Every one of us is. And ultimately, yeah, I think maybe the idea, as we were just discussing, about sharing, being open, being vulnerable, which took me a long time to get there, to really be like, I mean, now obviously since I'm a memoirist, I'm like, there's no secrets here, but um, I just think it makes the world a more interesting place, right? When we can connect over these experiences, shared or not, because I think my book is about a story that is quite literally by definition unique and also totally universal.
Sure, for sure. So I want to open it up. Thanks so much, you guys. It's awesome talking with you and giving me your time this morning. Can anybody have a question that I can answer about the book, or any of the five of us? I'd love to hear from you. You can either unmute and ask it, or you could put it in the chat, and love to answer it.
Well, a question I've been asking myself going over, because it's a span of, say, a life,
Hmm.
is, what do I want people to be what is the theme of my life, essentially? And
Hmm.
I wondered if you had asked yourself that question as you wrote these. Now, I know you're a prolific journalist and creative nonfiction writer, as
Yeah.
well as a novelist and a really fine poet. But that's what I was curious about for myself, but also for you, is kind of, like, okay, what have you learned about let's limit it because of the nature of this call,
Yeah.
or meeting, is what's something you learned about yourself that maybe you weren't as aware of before you wrote said essay?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think that the theme of this book is really finding my voice, and that's like literally and figuratively. So building confidence and having the courage to do difficult things. Like I always wanted to be a full-time writer, but was told, that's not something you can do as a living. So go find a job that pays you to do that. And I was like scribbling my poems on the side. And I think this book is about, when I get to the point of, I'm gonna be who I am, who I wanted to be back then, fully. Like this is what I'm gonna step into. And so, in fact, the last essay in the book is called Voice, and it's literally about having trouble with my voice and what that sort of means metaphorically. And so that was like a very interesting one to write as well. And so, and that's also like kind of bookended because in the first year of my first marriage, I got strep throat 3 times, and I was like, 28 or 29 or something, and was like, what's going on here? And there's all these like intuitive medicine reasons why that say something about your life or your relationship or whatever. And then at the end, like I had the past couple of years, I've had this issue on my vocal cords, and I also see a metaphor in it, like it's sort of saying use your voice where it's most important and conserve it for that. And so I think that's the theme of this. I think it's sort of like a this is my midlife crisis, guys. That's what that is. That's the answer. My midlife awakening, not crisis, awakening. That's what it is. So yeah. Anybody else? Anybody in the audience have a question they want to ask for
I've got a
Danny?
question, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, sure.
I'm kind of in the audience, right?
Yeah,
So when you sat down to do this, I know you've obviously written a lot, and so you have to choose which stories you want to choose,
yeah. Uh-huh.
compile them together. Walk me through like how you chose that, which like I'm choosing these ones and then ordering them this way, and like was there like this certain theme that you wanted, or was it kind of a process like as you went? Because I think about that
Yeah,
same thing. Like what if I were to do that? How would I even go through, and what would change, and what would the process look like? Because that's a totally, when you already have memoirs and
yeah.
you're compiling them into a cohesive piece, that's very different than writing a book from scratch.
Yeah, so it was not easy. And I went through all the essays that I had that have been published in the past 5, 6 years, and some essays that haven't been. And to see like were there common themes, were there common subjects, and like I have nature writing, I have loss, I have relationships, I have like there's so many parenting, like what's the common ground? So of course it's me, but then what's the theme in that? And so I had to look at which ones deserve to be in the book. And in fact there was one that in the first round of the manuscript was in there, and I ended up taking it out. It was an older essay, and I noticed a difference in my writing voice in the older essays and like the more recent ones. And I didn't really love that earlier voice. I'm like, oh, that's not as developed as I want it to be because I'm in a different place. So that was a question. And some of those old stories just don't matter to me as much anymore. Like I've evolved as a person into a new place and wanted to be like where I am right now. Because once my dad always said, out of your mouth printed, which meant, it's like an older way of saying like if you say it, you can't get it back, which we all know and everything. And so I was thinking about that. Like if I take one of those older essays and I put that into print, then it's always out there. And do I want that? Um, so I have 4 sections of the book, and so there's the nature writing ones are sort of in their own section. Um, the parenting ones and like work related ones are in one section, and so I sort of group them together and organize it in that way. And I wanted to bookend the book with like the very first and the very last essay. I think are incredibly strong essays, and there's 2 or 3 that are older that maybe I don't like as much, and so I sort of buried them in the middle. See if you guys can figure out which ones. Let me know what you think. And maybe you won't notice, but yeah, it took some refining. And my husband Dan, who's on the call, is always one of my first readers once I think the book is as far along as it can be. And it was funny because he's like, well, you talk about this little story at 3 different times. Do you really want to do that? And I'm like, oh, that's a good point, because each individual essay can reference things that other essays reference, because maybe the same people aren't reading them, but now they're in a book, and so they are reading them. And so is there repetition that was redundant that I needed to get rid of too? So it was an interesting process. It really was. Yeah. All right. Any audience questions? I think we could probably take like one and then go on to the giveaway if anybody.
Lynn, there's one in the chat.
Oh, okay. From Rachel. Thank you. How has writing about such personal topics changed me or supported me to move through difficult experiences? It's a really good question, Rachel. Thank you. Well, I think that writing about losing my dad helped me to be able to move on from it. That I sort of needed to sort of commune with that loss for about a year in my writing. And obviously, I still miss him every day, and he's there with me. Sometimes I dream about him at night, but I'm able to function. I'm able to not notice that he's not here. It's been 5 years. So it's gotten easier to live with, I think. But writing that first year did help me really move through the grief a little more completely. And I think that writing about leaving Orthodoxy definitely processed all of my emotions from that and let me leave it. So like, I don't really care anymore. I'm just like, okay, I did that. It's done. It's in the past. And the same thing with my first marriage. I think I said a lot of things in essays that are in this book that I had been wanting to say. And I felt like I didn't really have a voice in that marriage. And so by putting them on the page, I could just get it out and then I could move on, which is nice. So I think that writing has really helped me emotionally process a lot of this and be able to just, say it's part of the past and I've learned from it. So I think that's been a real healing gift for sure.
Thank you.
Anybody
That's
else?
something I really noticed
Can I
about
add-
how you moved through life. Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah.
Lynn, before you do the giveaway, I just want to say I love the title of the book, and I wondered if you could share with us how you came up with the title.
Oh my God, it was so hard to come up with the title, I have to say. It's the title of one of the essays. And the essay, Forest Walk on a Friday, it was published in Abandoned Journal, which is a literary magazine. And it's a short, it's like it's kind of flash nonfiction, to be honest. It's under 1,000 words. And it's about taking a hike in a forest on a Friday, literally, but basically how like nurturing and rejuvenating it is for me to be in the forest, and how that wasn't really necessarily something that I did as a child, but it's something that I've come to do as I've come more into myself. Um, and I think that that is a perfect metaphor for the book. And so when I wanted the title to be something that could include, everything in the book, and that was really hard to come up with. And so I thought, if I take one of the essay titles and put it as the book title, and it has metaphorical powers, then that would be good. And I will say also, I just want to give Sue and Patty are not on the call, but the cover. So when you guys get your copy or you look online, I don't know if you can see it here, but there's all kinds of little details in the tops of the trees, and they represent little things that are in each of the essays. So there's lots of stuff to take a look at there, and they're my cover designers. Sue and Patty are in England, and they're amazing, and they did a really good job with it too. So that was really fun. So, all right, let's do some giveaways. So Tams, do you want to take it over and see who on the call is winning some free stuff?
Yes. So I've put it in the chat, but I'll still read it out. And I just want to thank everyone again for joining us. And Lynn, congratulations again. We're so excited for your new book. But to our lucky winners, oh, sorry, let me get my video here. We have for Forest Walk on a Friday is Steve Bryan. For I Want to Be Once is Janet Bailey. Jessica's memoir is Helen Stone, and the print copy of Story Unlikely is Brian Shear. Congratulations, guys, and thanks again for joining us.
So for all of you who just won, please in the chat connect with Tam so that she can get your info so we can get you guys those copies. And please go buy a copy. It would mean the world to me. But also, if you buy it in this hour, then it surges on especially Amazon and puts the rankings up. So if you were going to buy it, go do it now, and then they'll say, "Wow, you're bestseller!" Blah blah blah. And it was really great to see all you guys. So thank you for being here.
Well,
Thank
I'm
you.
just going to say while we were doing this, I bought your book and Jessica's. So
Yeah.
everybody should buy 6 copies of each of those.
Absolutely.
Thank
Here,
you.
here.
Yes, I love that.
Awesome.
I want to learn about Jessica's interesting life.
You won't be able to put it down.
Thank you.
It's so good. Yes.
Just wait till she starts writing about me. It's gonna get wild.
All right, guys. Thanks for being here. Submit to Danny's contest deadline tomorrow, and it's great to see you guys all. Thank you, Jessica, ML, Kim, and Danny, for being on here with me. And
Thanks
for
for
everybody.
inviting us.
Thanks,
Thank
Lynn.
you and congratulations.
Yep.
Yes,
Congrats, Lynn.
congratulations.
Thank
See ya.
you.
Bye, everybody.
Congrats.
Steve, can you please also put your email and contact details in the chat?
Tams, I have Steve's info if you want. So
Okay,
yeah.
perfect.
So Brian and Helen, you guys gave your details to Tams, yeah?
Yes,
Yes.
I'm going to buy your book.
All right, awesome. Thanks,
Um,
guys.
yeah, I want to know all your secrets.
They're all out there now. Bye, everybody.
Okay, we'll talk to you later. Thanks. Okay.